So good afternoon to everyone and welcome to today's virtual design review panel meeting. This is the second item on the agenda today. I'm Joe Bordeloni, host of this meeting, but panel member David Cooluci will be the chair. In addition to the panel members, we have the applicant team, city staff, members of the public, and the media observing this meeting. Members of the public are welcome to observe the meeting only. The session is being recorded and will be uploaded to the DRP webpage. Just a reminder to please keep your microphones muted if you are not speaking. Thank you, and David, please begin the meeting.
Good evening, or good afternoon, I should say, and welcome. Joe, can you please confirm that the session is being recorded?
It is.
And are there any changes to the agenda today?
There are not, no.
So I'll just ask if any of the panel members have any kind of conflict of interest concerning this submission, and I'll take silence to mean that there are no conflicts. Second item on the agenda today is the review of 1072 Main Street East. The lead planner in the file is Jennifer Allen. Good afternoon, Jennifer. We're ready for your presentation. Please keep the presentation under 10 minutes.
Thank you, David. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Allen. I'm a planner 2 on the urban team, and I'll be presenting the submission for 1072 Main Street East. So the proposal is to construct a one-story side and rear addition to the existing Hamilton Children's Museum located within Gage Park. The proposed addition will have a total area of approximately 344 square meters and will consist of 2 new program rooms, 2 covered terraces, and a lobby area connecting the program rooms. So the subject property is located at the northeast corner of Gage Park, located just where Main Street East and King Street East intersect. And so, yeah, it's located within Gage Park with various commercial and residential uses along Main Street East as well as on Kensington Avenue South. So this is the view of the subject property looking south from Main Street East. And then this is the view of the rear facade of the existing Hamilton's Children's Museum from the rear of the site. And then this is the view of the west facade of the existing Children's Museum, as well as the east facade of the existing museum. This is the view of the subject property looking west from the intersection of Main Street East and King Street East. And then this is the view of the subject lands containing the playground to the east of the Children's Museum. This is the view of Gage Park looking south from the subject lands, and the view of the gardens within Gage Park looking northwest from the subject lands. So there's, as I mentioned, there's various residential and commercial buildings along the north side of Main Street East. So this is the view looking north from the subject lands. This is looking east towards King Street. And then this is the view looking west along Main Street East. And then this is the view of the residential dwellings along Kensington Avenue South, just east of the subject property. So this is the proposed site plan showing the additions to the existing museum. And then this is a floor plan concept, as well as the cross sections looking from the north and the west. This is the north elevation, south elevation, west elevation, and the east elevation. And then these are just some renderings showing the proposal. So westerly side, the rear. So the subject property is identified as a primary corridor on Schedule E of the Urban Hamilton Official Plan, and it is designated as open space on Schedule E1 of the Urban Hamilton Official Plan. So a primary corridor shall function as a vital part of the surrounding neighborhood and shall serve as a central focal point. And then it shall provide a comfortable and attractive pedestrian experience. An open space shall be used for recreational activities, conservation management, and other open space uses, and it shall promote healthy and active communities. So some of the urban design policies included in the Urban Hamilton Official Plan include respecting existing character, development patterns, built form, and landscapes, promoting quality design consistent with the locale and surrounding environment, contributing to the character and ambiance of the community through appropriate design and streetscapes and amenity areas, contemplating the existing massing patterns, rhythm, character, color, and surrounding context. So the subject property is zoned P3, which is citywide P3 zone, which permits public service use, including the Children's Museum. So specific areas of discussion today are: does the proposal organize space in a logical manner through the design, placement, and construction of new buildings, streets, structures, and landscaping? Does the proposal provide connections and access to all buildings and places for all users regardless of age and physical ability? And does the proposal use materials that are consistent and compatible with the surrounding context? So that's all for my presentation. Thank you for listening.
So I guess we turn it over to the consultants and ask for them to provide additional information, and please keep your presentation under 10 minutes as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. So my name is David Cooluci. I'm with Workshop Architecture. I've had the privilege of working with the Children's Museum and Carolyn's team for close to 10 years, believe it or not. So several projects before this one in terms of feasibility studies, programming, some upgrades, excuse me, upgrades to the existing house. And now at this exciting step where we're contemplating a major addition. So I'm just going to share my screen. I'll just say, hopefully everyone can see that. I reviewed some of these presentations just to get a feel for how this discussion goes, but I actually didn't see any videos, so I wasn't expecting that pre-presentation. So I have some of the same material, but I'll just go through it quickly and try and focus on the talking points that were identified. These were the three specific points of the Urban Hamilton Official Plan that we identified, or that was identified in our pre-SPA application, and that we wanted to address through this presentation. So that's support and facilitate development along the primary corridors. So as was mentioned, there's two corridors that kind of converge at the east corner of the park where the museum's already located. So operationally and program-wise, it's a great contribution and addition to those primary corridors, which will be further enhanced by this proposal, which will just make the museum able to expand its own programming and offer, offer more and serve more people through its expansion. Promote and support design which enhances and respects the character of the neighborhood. So we'll talk a little bit further about the character of the neighborhood. Of course, the museum itself is an addition to the historic Gage House, which actually predates the park itself and the wider neighborhood. So that's an interesting context to be working with. And I think the addition demonstrates how this contributes to that interesting history and ongoing dynamism. And then protect and enhance the system of linked natural areas. So obviously being within this park setting, that's a significant, I think, benefit of this project, how it will enhance the cultural amenity within the park through increased accessibility and, as I said, increased programming. So I'll just go through this quickly because it was kind of covered in the previous presentation, but this is looking at the northeast corner of the park. Surrounding neighborhoods are largely sort of single family homes, with the exception of the corridors themselves, which are sort of mixed use and up to sort of 3 stories, combination of at-grade commercial and residential above. This is some more photos. Again, wasn't expecting the previous presentation, but just giving you immediate context of Gage House. And I'll just introduce some of the issues that the addition attempts to deal with. So the existing house already, as was pointed out, had this sort of, it's effectively a portable added at some point about 20 years ago to expand their programming. So one of the issues that we want to demonstrate through this project is the enhanced accessibility offered by the addition and clarification of the front entrance, because right now there's of course the original house front door and a new sort of front door at the portable. One is much more prominent architecturally, one is much more prominent operationally. They're sort of in conflict with each other, and that's one of the key drivers in sort of harmonizing that experience and operations for the museum that the proposal tries to look at. A few more photos of the park context. I'm sure, given the stature of Gage Park, everyone's fairly familiar with this site, but at the east end, it's an interesting position because, as I said, although the house predates the park, it is also the sort of eastern terminus of a primary east-west axis on this sort of formal component of the park that's right on Main Street. So again, just looking at some photos of that more up close context and that entrance sequence where you arrive from Main Street into sort of drop off and parking loop to the sort of historic front door of the house, which looks to the uninitiated like the main entrance, and then what is currently the main entrance sort of tucked further back. Again, just looking at that park context. So that formal axes that's set up along Main Street, a look at that view towards the escarpment, and then the view east, a little bit washed out in the sun in this photo, but the house, how the house and Children's Museum currently provides that backdrop at the eastern terminus of that view. So just looking at the immediate context, as was identified, the project proposes to do a couple of things. It proposes to make an accessible entrance to the museum, expand their programming through a series of new spaces on the west and south portion of the building. It also proposes to sort of rationalize a little bit the parking such that it's only on the north and east sides of the building. It currently wraps all the way around. And the reason for that is, although the building's located in the middle of the Gage Park, there's actually not great access to the park proper. So the other thing that this project does is sort of create some both outdoor terraces off the program rooms, but it also kind of defines and sequesters an outdoor space within the park that would be more available for the dedicated specifically for the museum's use. And that's centered around 3 mature trees, which would be retained, and that's a little bit washed out on my slide, but hopefully that's visible on your screen. And that's a main sort of organizing principle of the addition. The landscape strategy works with that, where there's sort of low and ornamental planting around the existing building and at the front, and these are the sort of snapshots of that planting in the bottom 6 images, and sort of higher perimeter planting around that sequestered, as I call it, outdoor courtyard, and that's sort of more the images that you see at the top. I'll go through the elevations quite quickly because that was already identified in the previous presentation. But I'll just talk about the building itself, how it's organized, which is that there's, of course, you can see fairly well in this image, the original house. There's a sort of link circulation structure that wraps the house, which gives some breathing space for the historic structure between the new addition and then the form of the new addition. So program room to the west side and then additional program room to the south side. So this is taking place of the portable classroom that was added and would be removed under this proposal. This is all entirely accessible, obviously, to both OBC and the Hamilton barrier-free guidelines. So that means elevating the main floor level of the museum to the same original main floor level of the house for a seamless transition back and forth between the addition and the house. It also means updating washroom facilities and adding a lift, which would be a staff-only lift, but to gain access to the 2nd floor. So that's not available generally to the public, but would be available for staff admin areas. Then those terraces that we mentioned at the front and the back, also accessible, bring a barrier-free path of travel from grade at park level up to initially the terrace and then into the museum, and just promote that sort of indoor-outdoor opportunity that a building in a park has a unique opportunity for. This is the final view, which is the, as I say, eastern terminus of the sort of formal axes set up at the north end of the park. So currently that terminates on the house. It would now terminate on this addition placed in front of the house. So the addition is purposely using a residential sort of vernacular, if you like, of gable roofs. It's using a masonry cladding, but purposely differentiated from the historic structure with a glazed brick in a variety of color tones, so that it reads sort of reads as a single color at sort of driving speed for the traffic passing on Main Street, but at a more contemplative or slower speed, as this image shows, you have that depth of color and material that becomes more evident. I think that's 10 minutes or thereabouts. So.
Thank you. Good slide there, because that's the next part of this, is to turn over to the panel members to see if anybody has any questions for clarification. And Jennifer, Mallard, I think you kicked this off. Jennifer just disappeared. I think she may have.
No, sorry, I was unmuted, or I was muted, and my bad. So thank you for your presentations. And this is such an enjoyable project to take a look at. I have two questions. One, are there any lot lines that you have to strictly adhere to? Or does the whole Gage Park include all of the lands? Just wondering how much flexibility you have on the north side and on the east side.
Yeah, so there's no, strictly speaking, administratively, it's not a separate land parcel, so it's just within the Gage Park overall property, and it's all of course city owned. So there's no hard boundaries. There's obviously other constraints, and so I mean, operationally, the way the museum, a primary user of the museum is school groups. So there's a sort of existing drop-off loop at the front for buses or vans and whatnot that bring like a classroom at a time. So the intent was to maintain that as much as possible because it works relatively well, and just enhance that with the ramp and terrace entrance sequence, so that it could accommodate a large group arriving at one time, have them sort of stack up, get organized, and filter into the link itself. And then to the east side, I mean, again, this building, the challenge, and what's wonderful about it, but also the challenge is, of course, it has no real front and back, and it's sort of a pavilion. So on the east side, as I mentioned, the existing parking exists on the east side, which is it's a barrier, I guess you could say, between the playground space that we saw in the previous presentation. But there is a need for some immediate parking. But what we've done is, just consolidate it. It currently wraps around to the south of the building as well, which effectively kind of landlocks the building with no direct access to the park. So that's kind of been cut off to the south, which is where we've shown that sort of courtyard space in those terraces and more direct park access. So that's sort of a long-winded answer to.
Okay, thank you. My other question is, it was my understanding that the current entry, even not the symbolic entry at the street front, but the current entry is off to the side. And will that entry still be there? Will there be access on that side?
No, so well, maybe we should go back to the plan. But I mean, right now the official entrance, operationally, the entrance is a sort of vestibule that was built off of the portable classroom, if we call it that, and that's done, I guess, for accessibility reasons. But it's quite cramped, so that would be demolished as part of the removal of the portable classroom, and the entrance, if you like, the fee-paid entrance or the visitor's entrance would be consolidated solely at the front in a glazed vestibule that will encompass the historic front door of the house and the new front door of the the new front door will be in front of the house, but it'll be in one consolidated glazed lobby. So there's still access to the other direction where you mentioned, but that would be sort of exit only, and once you're past the fare paid zone.
Okay. Those are all my questions for now. Thank you.
Hoda, I think you're
Hi,
next on the list.
thank you for the presentation. As Jennifer said, this is very interesting project. I was wondering, I had the same question about the property line, and now you have answered that. I was wondering that the planting along that fence that you have around the side. So why really you needed to limit the side at east and south part of that yard?
Yeah, so I think a couple things I maybe didn't touch on in the presentation. So I mean, I guess the area that's being taken over as outdoor space dedicated to the Children's Museum, they'll be responsible for maintaining that planting themselves. So that's one consideration in the selection of the plant material. And I'm not a landscape architect, and I don't have that landscape architect with us, but I'll try and speak to these items. So so first of all, that's just to preface that it's no longer sort of parks staff. So that does sort of that does have an impact on some of that selection, but it's also a consideration for just creating a dedicated outdoor space that doesn't just bleed into the park. It's a concern for the Children's Museum themselves operationally, just for security, because obviously the park is kind of effectively it never closes. So there's outside of museum hours, there's still potentially park users. There is some issues with security and not vandalism, but there's some issues with security. So that was the idea of enclosing that as like having a boundary around that outdoor space, both to keep people sort of an arm's length from those outdoor terraces, and also operationally, so that people can flow inside and outside the museum within what you might say like the admission paid zone, right? So or they could incorporate outdoor programming potentially, but still within the Children's Museum property, as opposed to just within the wider park. If that makes sense.
Okay.
David, may I also answer?
Sure.
One of the concerns with the museum is that they have many young children who don't necessarily know that they're not supposed to run. And we have a parking lot on the east side. And what will happen is they'll run from the museum to the playground, and there's car traffic on that side. So the concern of the curator was to provide a safe space where parents could actually look away for 2 or 3 seconds, and they didn't have to worry about their children taking off across the park. So we wanted to enclose it. The guests are welcome to leave the museum and go to the park, but while they're within the fence, they know it's safe. So if they want to have a cup of coffee and sit down, they don't have to worry so much about what their kids are doing.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Jennifer Sison.
Thank you. Thanks, Jennifer and David, for your presentations. I think all of my questions have actually been asked and answered already. So thanks.
Yana.
Thank you. The same for me. No more questions.
Yeah, I have a question, just an operational question about, you described the buses coming in and they drop off. Did the buses park in your lot, or do they park elsewhere? Is that
Perhaps Carolyn can answer that. I think it depends on if it depends on the size of the bus. If it's sort of like the van bus, that could be accommodated in a normal parking spot. But if it was a larger school bus, there's no on-site parking for that. So it would be a drive-through and drop off and park elsewhere in the park or on the street.
That's correct.
I guess the other question is just, what do you see as the the important character defining aspects of the heritage building, as well as the character defining aspects of the landscape that you're working within in the Gage environment?
Easy, quick questions to answer. Yeah, I mean, I think the heritage building, as we mentioned in the full written submission, is I think its importance is primarily cultural. I mean, it's as opposed to necessarily architectural specifically. I mean, it's a handsome house, but it's not being maintained necessarily in its original context, even from the exterior, and obviously not in the interior. It's gone through many permutations and changes prior to this. But I think it's a handsome building with a certain, I think the defining characteristics, or what we appreciate about it, is just, I think, the rhythm of glazing and the mass. And I think in one of the elevations in particular, the mass as it steps down towards the escarpment. So the taller volume towards Main Street, a slightly lower gable roof below that, and then a lower one again. And so that rhythm of roofs, I think, is quite nice as it slopes towards the park. And that's something that the addition picks up on and provides yet another volume of gable roof in that sort of hierarchy, or that rhythm of roofs. Yeah, that's what I would say about the house and how the addition works within that. As I said, I mean, we were interested in this. We were interested, again, it's not necessarily, or not specifically, an architectural driver, but this sort of functional driver, or programmatic driver of like a house that predates the park, and it's being sort of gone through these different uses now as a cultural use, having a cultural use, a cultural program that's for children in a domestically scaled environment, but it's not a house. Like, these are interesting kind of inversions or evolutions of a domestic architecture. And so I think that's what we found interesting in the scale of the addition, and just working with that same, both in terms of construction techniques as a sort of, it has some steel framing, but wood frame building, and sort of just, wood frame trusses and masonry cladding. So kind of continuing with that language, I think, was something that we think is interesting architecturally. In terms of the landscape, again, I mean, Gage Park, I've had the opportunity to both work in and spend time in over the last 10 years. It's obviously an amazing sort of recreational amenity for the city, and I think as well it has some it's quite interesting where it has these very formal elements like we talked about at the front, but then it has elements that are less formal and a bit more not wild, but a bit more rugged. The boundary to the east, where the new stormwater retention and whatnot is placed in. So I think the immediate context that we're working with is, I think the most obvious one is that sort of eastern terminus of the sort of formal axis, and that's, I think, an elevation that we spent a lot of time with, both in this design and as sort of, we had a previous design even before this, of just being cognizant of that terminus of that design, because that outside of the realm of this, but I think the western terminus of that axis is less successful, where it's sort of a trellis element.
I guess the one last question I have is maybe not so much to you, but maybe to the city. The package of drawings that we received is extremely complete. It looks like it's very well advanced in its development. And I'm just wondering as to why it's coming to us at this late stage in its development.
I can perhaps answer that, but maybe, I mean, Carolyn's welcome to contribute again. So, I mean, in terms of the history of this, as I mentioned, we've been working with Carolyn and the team at the Children's Museum for close to 10 years. And so there was actually a previous design of this project about 4 or 5 years ago that actually went through SPA and was granted provisional SPA. And then it was, for budgetary reasons, it was put on hold, and it's wonderful that it's come back, and it's actually come back with a slightly different set of requirements and slightly higher budget. And so there was sort of, inside this, there was a previous design, which is probably why it appears more developed than you might expect to see at this stage. And equally, because we'd already gone through that SPA process once, we actually didn't realize that we would be subject to this process, because the previous time was, I guess, before the DRP had been set up. So again, we may have initiated this process a little bit earlier if we were aware that it was part of the approvals process, and therefore you may have seen drawings a bit sketchier.
Yeah, just to add to that, the project got a grant through ICIP. So prior to receiving that grant, we were on a holding pattern because we didn't have the funding. So with the grant being successful, we went back to David and asked him to do a minor redesign. So we actually had shovel-ready drawings that were ready to go, but we felt it had been, 4 years, David, since the design, we felt it needed a little bit of an update. And so you're correct in that the project was ready to go with the SPA approval, and we were ready to build. And then
Yeah, I should have clarified that. They were actually it was tender ready.
it was tender ready.
Yeah. But as Carolyn said, yeah, I mean, over those years, there have been obviously some OBC tweaks. There have been some, new thermal performance guidelines. There's new accessibility expectations, as well as the grant afforded a slightly higher budget and then opportunity, because the previous design actually wasn't able to remove the portable. So that portable would have actually still remained. So I think the fact that that's now encompassed in this, I think would be.
And so just maybe for a little bit more context on that front, the previous scheme, there's a very particular formal approach that you've taken with the sort of the three little gables there. Was that and its relative massing and position pretty similar to the previous scheme, and or is that part of the transformation? Is there any substantive different other than those kind of more technically driven comments that you just listed?
Right. The position of the addition on the west side of the building and the footprint was very similar in the previous iteration. The expression and the cladding was different at that time, and that was partially budget driven. So it wasn't clad in masonry originally. It was clad in a lightweight cladding, which I think the operators were never 100% comfortable with, just because of the environment, the park environment. There was a preference for masonry. So there was a change in the cladding and an update in the I guess roof lines, we could say, but the sort of footprint is quite similar to the previous.
That's it. Okay. I don't have any other questions, so I'm going to turn it over to this is Jennifer Mallard for her commentary.
Thanks, David. And thanks for your great detail in your presentations and your answers to the questions. This is a delightful little project, and I really love the little gable forms and the cladding being a glazed blue brick. I mean, we don't get an opportunity to use materials like that in this kind of simplified but really, really joyful application. So I think it's right for the program and it's right for the setting. All of that is great. I struggle with the entry, and the new enclosed vestibule is quite small compared to the space inside, and I feel that the purity and playfulness of those simple shed shapes is a little bit compromised with the vestibule and some of the terrace expression at the back. But and yeah, you said the existing house is not grand. It's not a protected heritage building, but nonetheless that entry has a decent expression to it, and I'm wondering if that gets a little bit watered down with the addition of the glass vestibule on the front. So my question about the side entry, and I know it would be compromising that heritage entry on the front, but it seems you've got more room and more circulation space to put a ramp and an entry on the side, even though that's not the traditional entry. And since you've been looking at this for 10 years, I'm sure you've done every permutation and combination available. But I just feel that heritage door is somehow not, the soul of it isn't visible. Maybe it's not coming through in the renderings, but I'm going to leave my comments there because I'm sure my colleagues have more comments. But congratulations on lovely, playful expression. That elevation from the west side is great. I just want to see it even more simplified, right? All for me.
Hoda.
Yeah. I think thank you for the presentation and the project and answering the questions. I really have a feeling that, okay, all projects, the landscape design should be integrated in the architectural design. For this project that is located in a park, it feels that it needs more effort to integrate landscape design, especially for the entrance. When I look through that, I feel that it's just filling the gaps with plants. Although I really appreciate the plant list that you have, mostly drought tolerant and native, but in the design point of view, I felt that it could help make the entrance more welcoming when we work on the design. And also the entrance on its own, I echo Jennifer's comments about the entrance, the main entrance, and also when we come inside, I felt that, okay, having the corridor and the reception as direction, it's not welcoming that much. So for me, entrance, looking from outside and then going inside, it's not that much welcoming. It's nice to have a big activity room at right when you come inside, but still I prefer to have reception closer and more welcoming, to have enough space and then going in separate spaces. So that is my suggestion about the entrance, and you could, I know it's in this step of project, it's hard to make changes, and probably it's not a perfect time for us to give the comments, I understand. But yeah, this is my comment. Thank you.
Jennifer.
Thank you. So I really appreciate a couple of things. I like how you preserve the existing oak trees. I like the use of native planting varieties. I'm happy that you've used ones that have interesting forms in winter, so you've got a little bit of that year-round interest. It looks like you've also had consideration for passive surveillance, making sure you're incorporating all those SEPTED principles to make sure people can see into and out of the site through the planting palette as well as the exterior design. So kudos on those. I think more could probably be done in redesigning the entrance and even the parking, noting that you want to preserve the bus drop-off for the schools. I think this could really contribute more to the public realm and create a true entrance moment at the front of the building. Building on Hoda's earlier comment, this could be an opportunity for more softscape at the entry and the front of the building. I also think the view shed from the central formal garden and the fountain to the historic Gage House is a really important one, as you've touched on. And while I appreciate the attempt to create something really vibrant that stands out, I'm not certain if the cyan colored glazed brick is the right approach, with the rest of the historic and culturally significant Gage Park to the west of this being very formal, very organized, and very symmetrical. I think you've got the symmetrical and organized, but it feels a little formaler on the Gage Park side and a little more playful over here, which may work because it is a children's museum. I just feel like the character of these features are a bit at odds to the park overall. I do think what you provided is really interesting. I think your vision and your objectives are really sound. It's really been a pleasure to review your design, and taking what my colleagues have said into consideration, I think you'll have a really excellent design overall. So thank you for that.
Yana.
Thank you. And thank you, David, for explaining the project. I also really like the architectural gestures of this proposal. I think it's a very thoughtful design, and it is well responding to the end users. I think I know the answer because you are this far in the project, but would it be possible to consider having the ground floor of the proposed addition at the grade, and to have the better connectivity with the surrounding, and to also avoid those two fairly large ramps, and then to deal with the floor elevation changes inside, either through various levels with smaller ramps between, or by maybe relocating that elevator to the west and using the elevator for all three levels, basically the new ground floor, the existing ground floor, and the second story, and being it a public elevator, not just for the staff. That was one suggestion, and I don't know if that's a possibility, but I think it would help. with the project. And the only concern I have is like how much of the original structure is covered, especially when looking from the Gage Park side. And the same as Jennifer, I would strongly suggest not to cover the main entrance, but think about how to work with the proposed programming and maybe move the program room 1 and the new vestibule farther into the site, at least slightly beyond the front wall of the existing building, to not overpower it and not obstruct the historic structure and create views toward it. And that's my only concern, basically. I like the materials very much. It's a children's museum, and the proposed materials and colors are very playful and suggestive of a special use. And thank you for that. That's all for me.
Thank you. I have to admit, I'm a bit conflicted about this because I feel that our advice is coming in at a very late point in the process. And I agree with most of the commentary of my fellow panelists. I like the humor that's embedded in the project, and I think a lot of the moves are completely appropriate for a children's cultural museum. And I think many of the architectural devices and approaches that you've taken are quite successful. I just feel there's a few opportunities that maybe are not exercised to the full potential that it would have liked. And one of the conflicts I have is the resolution of the axis, the formal garden axis, and the fact that the asymmetry relationship, that the three things, which I think are quite fun and inventive, as to that isn't, well, and to be honest with you, the existing building never really had a particularly satisfactory relationship to the formal entrance, and certainly what's there now with those ridiculous kind of concrete, almost defensive barriers there isn't, like, you're working with not much of value. So I'm not, it's more like the latent potential that termination of that axis happens. And I wonder whether in addressing some of these concerns that we've all kind of commented on in terms of the entrance, whether there is something that allows that entrance, that axis to be a little bit more celebrated as a, and I don't know, it may be even as simple as a color change in the brick, so that particular one is emphasized more than the others. I don't know. But I agree that the entry is somehow too tight. It's like there's too many things trying to happen in too small an area. And when I look at the site plan and don't know whether I can see in some ways you're reusing all kinds of existing asphalt and whatnot. And so I can understand that these decisions might be simply driven by, trying to make the money go where, spend it where you want. But I do feel that, by maybe rearranging the bus drop off a little more tighter and also the span across your parking lot is between the parking to the north and then the barrier-free parking against the house, that you could move the barrier-free parking up and maybe move that ramp up and just create a little bit more, as some of the other presenters said, a little bit more generosity at that might give you a little more leeway in terms of addressing these concerns. And maybe, I was wondering whether you just shift all three up so that the central one was on the main axis. But I can see it, and this is why I'm conflicted, because I think I'm not sure that would solve the entrance. It just brings more program up there. So I think that the other observation is that there is a kind of minimalist detailing that's applied against the building, and there's a lot of contact between the new addition and the heritage building, and there's always a challenge in that integration between a new building and the kind of brick facade coming down, and how you achieve a successful envelope So I think in some ways, some of the details as illustrated right now, a bit optimistic in terms of, the impact of how you're going to flash that and make it as elegant as it's detailed right now. And I would be looking at trying to actually reduce the amount of surface area that you're touching the heritage building in order to, pull away from it and not run into so much, you've created a kind of a lower ceiling where all of the, there's a lot of weather issues that are going to appear in that valley or that lower flat roof that you've got there, and a lot of it's going to be up against that heritage building. So I kind of, in some ways, I almost feel like you should just pull that whole addition into an object and put it beside it, and there'd just be a little connector that's your entrance and everything, and that you could have, rather than the kind of you kind of clung like a sort of like a lamprey solution in terms of attaching it to the building. And this is why, our advice is like, wow, we should have this conversation like when you were still working on a sketch paper, because I think you could have taken a much more aggressive stance towards your relationship to the rest of the park. Like you could have claimed some more territory and made the addition a more of a monument in a way that is but you're quite a ways down the road, so I don't know how useful any of this commentary is. And you have in your hand, in essence, I think, some degree of approval from a previous panel, I suppose, that may have, given you slightly different advice. So I don't know if this is just a headache, the kind of stuff that I'm providing you in terms of advice.
No, I think I'm not sure how this goes if I have an opportunity to just say a few things.
Oh, yes.
I appreciate.
I think I don't really have them. I don't know whether I have much more. I'm just going to check my notes, but you can respond in terms of it's certainly possible to have a conversation at the end here.
Great. I think that's what we hoped that this would be. Like I said, I read a few of the previous examples that were online, but I didn't watch the videos. And I think we were looking forward to this conversation, because as much as we have 10 years of history with this project, that can be a good thing as well as a bad thing sometimes. So I definitely appreciate the feedback that everyone said, and maybe I'll just touch on a couple of elements or a couple of comments. And the first one is just about the could the addition be at grade? And this is something that in previous iterations, like we went through and struggled with, because there's something wonderful about having it at grade, and you just flow inside and outside to the park. But given the scale of the building, it was just too difficult to reconcile the grade changes with the rest of the house and the multiple connection points that were necessary. We did do some sketches with that and basically pull the ramp inside, or the means of navigating that grade change inside. And of course, what that does, and what was some other people touched on, is, there is, even though we have a bit more budget to work with than the last time around, we're still really trying to stretch this budget. So as soon as you pull the ramp inside, all the clearances, it increases the GFA. And of course, that's interior space that you're paying, $350 a square foot for, or whatever, instead of an outdoor ramp. So those are, it's not that those things weren't considered and talked about. And we brought that up at a few different versions of this design process with the Children's Museum, and identified that as like a fundamental decision point. Like, do we place the addition at grade, and these are the advantages that come with that, or do we raise the addition up such that you're matching floor levels, and these are the advantages and disadvantages that come with that? And ultimately, the decision was made that for a host of reasons, it's preferable up at the main floor level of the house. But that's not to say that I don't appreciate the follow-on comments that about the challenge of resolving the front entrance. And that's something that it was a challenge with every iteration of this project. I think as we've alluded to, the existing configuration, it I guess honors or maintains, the existing condition, not the current design. It maintains the front door of the house, but of course that's a sort of staff entrance only, which I think has some architectural like purity or simplicity to it, but it's not at all conducive to like people coming to the site, right? Who actually come down the side, and there's like silly things like big footprints to help you know that you're supposed to go around the corner to this much more subservient secondary entrance is actually the public entrance. And so the previous iteration of this design, which actually didn't go to design review panel because I believe it wasn't set up at that time, but anyhow, we didn't go to it regardless. So it's never been presented like in this sort of format. But that version, which was slightly smaller, the addition was purposely back from the front wall of the house, which had certain advantages, and it was a sort of subservient position architecturally to the main facade of the house. But it still felt there were still challenges, which is reconciling that dual entrance of the museum and the historic entrance of the house, the historic front door of the house. And so, yeah, I appreciate the comments now about that's still not working as well as it could. I mean, this current iteration is obviously, as you've seen, like to try and create a lobby that sort of encompasses both, that you're sort of, maybe we're trying to do too many things and not doing them well enough, but trying to
I
see
might
that.
interject, David. We asked David to come up with a solution because what happens when people come to the site is they go up the front stairs, they knock on the door, nobody answers because they don't realize it's not the entry to the Children's Museum. And then they walk around the house and they can't figure out how to get in. And then they come to the rear door and it's very frustrating. So the encompassing the front door with some sort of transparent lobby was something that we posed as a solution to keeping the heritage door, restoring the heritage door, however, making sure that there was only one entrance. So when people came, it was both accessible entrance and a staircase together, so they're not separated, and that the heritage entrance and the main entrance are one. So it will still be visible and it will still be restored and not changed or made less historic. It just happens to be in the same location as the front foyer. So that was the thought process anyway.
I understand the conundrum, and I guess we're just suggesting that it's a little tight. Maybe there's an opportunity to re-examine it. And I guess the other thing is just whether there's an opportunity, even for example, like eliminating the parking at the back and pulling it all up to the front so that you had, you know, there's, when you look at the site, you just think, is there a little bit more effort on the, I mean, and it's obviously cost. So but even then, maybe it's a gravel parking lot. So maybe it's not so much of a cost, but just to eliminate that parking lot at the back and allow the kids to move from the facility right across the whole southern part of the site would seem to be something maybe to look towards, and also reducing just the amount of hard surface in terms of, you know, as I described, is there a way to just pull that what's there away from the house and create a little bit more real estate to increase some of the moves that you have? I think would be worth exploring. I don't know that we have anything else, and I think we're at our almost at our time limit. If there's more questions of clarification, happy to take them, but otherwise I think I don't know that we have any more comments at this point. And certainly thank you very much, and good luck with this interesting, I'm sure it will be a lively addition to Page Park, and it certainly looks like a major transformation of what you have now. So best of luck with that.
Thanks very much, and thanks everyone for your time reviewing the material and your comments today. It's helpful.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. If that's everything, have a good afternoon.